Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast show with me, Michael Tinkster. We are on a mission to share what Maverick leaders know and do to build businesses that deliver strong results and positive impact on people, society, and the planet. Thank you to our brand partner BizSimply for sponsoring this episode. BizSimply is the all-in-one workforce management software that enables your business to become more efficient and profitable. The software is designed and built by hospitality experts to enhance the way shift-oriented operators manage their business, optimize their entire people journey, and making every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, how we grow, and how we serve our customers. Together, we wanted to share strategies and tools to make the industry thrive long-term.
For me, having a different background is also helpful. There's a lot of people in the restaurant that also have come from different backgrounds in terms of haven't started in food and have come into it later, mixed with those that have. So it creates this really interesting biodiverse ecosystem, I guess. And I think that's a really great way of looking at it. I love the analogy of a farm. Start with really good soil health, have different crops, that some that have got deeper, nitrogen fixing roots, some that have really deep roots to really retain that moisture in the soil. And then you're looking at what crops go best next to others. So some can deter pests, some can attract other things. How can you ensure that you've got food all year round? How can you weather the storm, the things that are uncontrollable like the weather? It's its own little functioning ecosystem.
This is Chantelle Nicholson, a multi-award-winning chef, owner of Apricity Restaurant in Mayfair, which recently got a Michelin Green Star. She's one of the leading female voices in UK hospitality, and recently she's been named one of the top 100 influential women in hospitality. Chantelle is an advocate for seasonality, sustainability, and championing a veg-forward cooking through both the restaurant and her cookbook Planted. And if you love to cook like I do, and especially plant-based, this is a book you need to get. I can promise you that. I have for a long time wanted Chantelle to join me on the show, and I was super excited when we finally got the opportunity to sit down and talk about our shared passions for cooking, sustainability, circular economy, and how to build great team culture. We also talk about how to navigate the current challenges of the industry and how to solve these, and how you, at the same time, build a business as a force for good. We also hear about Chantelle's entrepreneurial journey and how she managed the ups and downs as a founder. If you want to get more insights on what Maverick leaders do and know, as well as more backstage info on the show, sign up for the weekly newsletter Maverick Talk. 5 minutes each week to change your leadership and business, maybe forever. Find the link in the show notes on hospitalitymavericks.com. I can promise you this conversation is super inspiring, and I hope you get as much out of it as I did. Enjoy. So today we're going to be talking about plants, and for people that's normally listening to the show know that I'm quite obsessed with plants as well. I'm not saying this is the only solution to change the world, but actually the way we eat can actually change the world, and I believe. And my guest today, I would say, also believes that, and she will confirm that in a second. But I'm very much think we're very aligned on that side, and actually it took me, Chantelle, who is our guest today, has been on my list for quite a while, but I didn't know how to find. I could have reached out to her, but I always liked that somebody else vouches for what we do here. And finally, we found a way through our former guest, Domini, from the show, and she was so helpful to put us together. So I'm very excited about that. We're going to be talking about your journey today, Chantelle, but also how we can change the world by the way we eat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So for people that doesn't know about you, Chantelle, and your incredible journey, and your that you're extremely obsessed about plants and you think we should eat more of them. Can you talk a bit about the incredible journey you've been on and actually where you are today and what you're working on now?
Gosh, how long have you got? No. So I think let's start at the beginning. So as you can probably hear, I did not grow up here. I grew up in New Zealand, surrounded by beautiful produce, beautiful scenery, and also being a very small, isolated country, eating a lot of seasonal food. And I think that's where my love for produce, my love for, I guess you say, plants, probably stems from. So I always loved food, loved eating it, loved cooking it from a very, very young age, but didn't ever consider it a career path. So finished high school, and decided that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I thought I'd do something that was kind of quite broad. So I went to university to do a law, and it was called commerce back then, degree. And that was where I started, I guess, after high school. Partway through that, I needed a job to be able to fund my studies. And I wanted to do something that was different to what I was studying. I wasn't particularly enamored with what I was studying, to be honest. So I thought, if I go and do something that I do enjoy, then hopefully that's also, kind of a killing two birds with one stone, to get an income and learn something new. So went into a local cafe in the city that I was studying in, and just said to them, look, I have no experience, but I really love to cook. I'd really like a job, and here's my CV. I'm just going to leave this with you. To which they replied that they were about to put out an ad for a weekend cook. So they were happy to give me a go if I was happy to jump on in. So I guess that's where the professional cooking began many, many years ago. So I ended up cooking pretty much full time whilst I was studying. I then went on to work in a small restaurant, and finished my studies and just kept cooking, because I just loved the energy of the kitchen and just being part of something. And then my mother said to me, well, you've kind of spent quite a long time and quite a lot of money in these degrees that you've now got. So just go and give them a go. Like, if it's not for you, it's not for you, but you won't know unless you try. To which I responded as the dutiful daughter and did just that. So went and started working in the law field, for the law and banking, really, for about a year and a half. But throughout that time, still dabbled a little bit in the cooking, and actually entered a competition, which was ironically run by Gordon Ramsay, and actually managed to get to the final of that competition, at which point I was then offered a job at the Savoy Grill by Josh Emmett, who was the head chef of the Savoy Grill at that time, also a fellow Kiwi, and basically said to me, well, whenever you come to London, there's a job for you. So I thought that was far too good an opportunity to turn down. So 18 and a half years ago, I kind of jumped on a plane, thought I'd come for 2 years, give it a go. And that was when I moved to London all those years ago.
And then you started in the Savoy.
Started at the Savoy Grill, yes, started in pastry. Was there for about a year and a half, then moved over to what was then Patrice at the Berkeley Hotel. Was there for about, 6 or so years, and then decided that I wanted to do something a bit more. So I actually then came kind of out of the kitchen and opened what was known then as the Gilbert Scott Restaurant in St Pancras as general manager. So I opened that in 2011. Then stuck with doing a little bit of kitchen work, but mainly kind of ops and running the restaurants, to then open Tredwells in 2014 in an operational role. But then 6 months after opening, went back into the kitchen as an interim measure, but then never came back out. And then obviously lots of things happened with COVID and everything, and I decided that I really wanted to open somewhere that was small and was a bit more purpose-led in terms of my ethos and my thoughts about food. So opened Apricity just over a year ago, April 2023. And here we are today.
Apricity, why that name? Because that was one of the things I was trying to Google as I was preparing for this, and I wanted to hear your version.
So I wanted a name that symbolized regeneration, but regeneration is quite a clunky word, and I looked it up in different languages and just couldn't really find something that kind of suited. And then I happened to stumble across apricity, which actually means the warmth of the winter sun. So for me, that symbolizes regeneration, rejuvenation, and joy, which is what I wanted the restaurant to be.
And you have like you go on your website and you read other things you have been writing or been interviewed around. You talk a lot about, you have this mantra around food is joy, food is memory, food is cohesive, food is life. How did that come together, and where did that come from?
I think I think part of it is full circle from growing up, as I mentioned before, and just being surrounded by amazing food, being also surrounded. My aunt and uncle had a stone fruit orchard, so I was kind of exposed at a very young age as to how food is grown, produced, the challenges that come with that, and the hard work that goes into it, but then also the amazing taste of freshly picked, sun ripened peaches, nectarines, apricots. You just can't beat it. So I think for me, it's very much been that common thread of running through that it is, at a base level, yes, we need food to survive, right? But then moving on from that, it's very much something that we enjoy. It's very much something that connects all of us. And it's very much something that can be, can evoke a lot of memories, can evoke a lot of joy, and can also, bring people together in a way that nothing else really can. And something that also then I think when you delve further into that, it's very much looking at to ensure that people have that same access to it that I guess I, have the privilege of both as a child and then also now as an adult.
And I love that thing when you have access to it. It should be a human right that we all could get natural, healthy food. But that's not where we are. But that's definitely the vision that we need to work with. And then you talk about something people come together around, because I think like we are on such a discourse on so many subjects, and I think if it's like religion or worldviews or Brexit or pandemic, like there's been so many discourses where actually I think you say something really interesting, that actually food and meal times is actually where we can actually come together, everybody, without actually having any challenges of, because we can talk around meals as well, and we need to talk to solve our differences. And actually the meal, in a way, in my view, often put a bit of a what do you call, a rest on the differences, because we can start talking about the meal and what we like and we don't like.
It's a bit of a mediator in a way, isn't it? I guess, yeah. It kind of acts as that that sense of bringing people to a common ground.
And how have that philosophy then now evolved into your new restaurant venture? How has that how do you have that impacted the way you done the restaurant, the way you think about sourcing? I think that's the really interesting, because this is like as I see it, the full-blown come to life version of that vision philosophy.
Yeah, it's very much it in practice versus being a philosophy. It's actually in practice now. And I think it's very much looking at the 360 approach to food and to restauranting, I guess, because it looks at, number one is the people that are involved in it, and that's the team, but it's also the guests, but it's also the suppliers that work with it, and it's everyone that kind of is involved in a restaurant, which is, the spider's web is huge of any restaurant. So it's very much looking at how we work, who we work with, how those relationships are formed, but also trying to work in a more circular way. So rather than having kind of linear relationships with suppliers or team or guests, it's very much trying to look at that circle to say, well, how can we close that loop? How can we support you? how can you support us rather than it just being a supply and demand, straight line? How can we actually turn that into a circle that we support each other and that we can do better things together? And then I think if you look at the sourcing as well, it's very much in terms of, what are the things that our suppliers that we like working with struggle to sell. Things like perhaps, as an example, offal. So how can we then take that, which allows them to sustain their business financially, but also in terms of minimizing any waste? How can we then take that, turn into something delicious that we can also then, in a way subliminally educate our guests that actually offal can be delicious, or certain things can be delicious. It's just in the way that you actually prepare them. So it's very much, it's kind of as corny as it sounds, it is very much a journey, and very much different things happen along that journey, and different curveballs come at us, different paths lead us along different ways, but it's very much about trying to have a net positive impact. And I don't mean that in terms of, I think one of my bugbears is this kind of carbon tunnel vision that we talk about, because I just think that there's so many other things that we need to be factoring in. And some of those things naturally will reduce carbon. Therefore, we don't necessarily need to look at that as the be all and end all. It's actually looking at everything that surrounds that. So it's very much saying, how can we have a net positive impact? And whether that is through reducing our waste, whether it's through increasing the joy we bring to people, whether it's through encouraging people to come into the industry. I think all those things, it's very, very multifaceted.
And how have, building the philosophy you've probably done over the many years of cooking, I guess, and going back and often visiting your childhood, and there's lots of, in my own world, has come from how my mom and dad ran restaurants and how they believed in the whole supplier, very close to the supplier, could almost go out and touch the cow before it ended on the plate. But how had that also, that journey, but also then studying law and actually worked in law banking, have you seen that you're taking some positives out of that? Because it seemed like it was a world you were escaping a bit, but have you seen the positive of that as now running restaurant businesses? Because often people come directly into the restaurant industry, either they're born into it or they get as part of their education, but never actually practice what they studied.
Yeah, I think it's, you can take something from every experience you have in life, can't you? And I think for me, I guess the organizational skills or the business skills, being able to read a contract, those sort of things are very handy when you're running a restaurant, when you're running any business. And I think to then be able to, keep it within that circle rather than having to rely on many, many different people. Actually, if you can rely on people that are very much in that line of thought, in terms of people that are working in the restaurant, that's a better way of a better use of a resource. So for me to be able to do have those skills to bring to the table, helps, I guess, others to be able to focus on what they need to do in their roles. And also then how can we, we're kind of constantly thinking as a team about how we can improve, how we can do things better, how can we reduce, the use of something, how can we increase our, the kind of, as I mentioned before, that kind of net positive impact. How can we be more positive in our impact? And so for me, having a different background is also helpful. And, there's a lot of people in the restaurant that also have come from different backgrounds in terms of haven't started in food and have come into it later, mixed with those that have. So it creates this really interesting kind of little biodiverse ecosystem, I guess, whereas, and I think that's a really great way of looking at it, as if we are looking at a restaurant in terms of, I love the analogy of a farm. So, you need to start with really good soil health. You need to plant have different crops, some that have got deeper, nitrogen fixing roots, some that have really deep roots to kind of really retain that kind of moisture in the soil. And then you're looking at what crops go best next to others. So some can deter pests, some can attract other things. How can you ensure that you've got kind of, there's food all year round? How can you weather the storm, the things that are uncontrollable like the weather? It's its own little functioning ecosystem.
I love that. I never heard it in that way, but I'm with on you in that journey because like if one thing we need to fix in farming is the soil health, which is a totally different conversation because that's actually decides the quality of the food we able to put on our plates in general. But what makes you or your new venture, Apricity, what makes it stand out? What is like different from any other restaurant?
There's a number of differences. Some of them are more practical, some of them are more, I guess, relational. But I think just looking at, yeah, I mean, where do I start? I think if we look at for me, I was really intent on having an operation that was only 5 days a week from a mental health perspective, really, and mainly my own, in terms of having an operation that was going, kind of 7 days a week. It's very hard. I find it very hard to switch off, and to have that, I guess, my own regeneration or rejuvenation. So for me, that was really important, and that also for the team, that one of those days was a weekend day, so a Sunday, so that they could, spend time with friends or family that also had, a lot of the majority of the world works on a kind of Monday to Friday basis. So if we can have a little bit of that, half of that, then that's, for me, that was something that was really important. So that's one of the things, I guess, in terms of actually the way the fit out was done, very much working in a circular fashion, with David Chenery from OS Object Space Place, who designed it for us with the intent of trying to repurpose as much as possible from the strip out, also trying to use as much recycled material as possible, and really trying to be as efficient as we could be, from day dot, really. And then into the actual operation itself, so things like we don't use any cling film, we minimize anything single use, and it's only if it actually, is a necessity that we can't get by without. We also have the mentality that we don't, anything that is edible, we don't throw in the bin, so we find a way to use it. And then from even things like, water and energy, we're conscious of, running taps or using too much water and things that we can then, that then just kind of goes down the drain. Energy as well. So because we're open Tuesday to Saturday, on a Saturday night, we switch off as many things as we can so that they also have a rest as well. So where we keep all of our, so all the fridges within the kitchen itself, we turn them all off and we put everything into the big walk-in fridge. So all the equipment gets a break as well, which, in terms of longevity of its life I think is really significant. So yeah, and I think the menu itself, we don't print menus; they're all digital, so that allows us the flexibility to change, constantly, which also feeds into the, the kind of the low waste, the zero waste aspect, but also enables us to very much. One of the benefits of that, which I didn't get before we opened, was that it saves our most precious resource, which is time, people and time. So I think we've all had those times of fighting with printers, and that, the time it takes to print things is quite vast. So just to be able to eliminate that's been huge. And the menu itself is probably, I think, looking at our sales stats, we're about 55% plant-based, and then 19% vegetarian, and then I think 15% meat, 12% seafood perhaps. So again, kind of really focusing on the vegetable side of things, not eliminating meat, because I feel that for everything to coexist and for the, the biodiversity in the ecosystem, that it's important that we do have well-reared meat and dairy as part of as part of its own ecosystem. It's important. So that's probably a smattering of kind of some of the things that we do to do things differently.
It's very interesting you talk about, because like lots of times when you talk about changing the world by the way we eat, often people think straight away is extreme veganism. Well, what you're saying as well, which I also believe, if you want to have to move the majority with this consuming meat or dairy, then actually you need to give them better options. And you can't do that by putting a barrier up saying you're not allowed to eat meat, actually, but then you eat less but better meat.
Yeah, and it frustrates me that it becomes so binary so quickly, meat or no meat. It's like, actually, there's space for everything. There is space for everything, that we can coexist. And yes, we need to eat more plants, 100%. But we also need, we need the animals to fertilize the soil. We need to look at how many people are involved in farming in this country. It's incredible. And there's incredible people doing amazing, amazing things. And, culture and livelihoods and history would all just be turned off if we suddenly said, no, let's not eat meat anymore. I think it's an important part of an ecosystem.
And what have you seen since you opened the doors? What has been the journey? What have people perceived your philosophy? How they're interacting with you? What do you see from a restaurant performance point of view?
It's been really positive. And there's parts of me that kind of thinks, gosh, is this actually happening and working and functioning well? I think that I was really mindful of how we communicate what we do to start with, and not wanting to be a martyr about it, and not wanting to, again, say this is right, this is wrong. And the way to do that, I think we still analyze how we do it, and we still want to find ways of being able to communicate better, and also to respect those people that come for a meal, and rather than actually wanting to know more, they just want to sit there and enjoy a meal. So I think sometimes there's that element of trust and kind of inherent subconscious trust that, okay, I don't really want to know anything more about my food, but I feel very confident that what I'm eating is, has been well sourced, has been prepared by people that enjoy what they do, are being paid properly for what they do, and everyone in the ecosystem is being rewarded. So for me, it's very much about that fine line between how much you say and how much you don't. And I think, as I said, we're still trying to find the best way of doing that. And we have people that say to us, oh, we would have liked to have heard more about a certain aspect, after their visit, or people that, kind of aren't really interested. So it's very much finding that balance. But overall, people that, our feedback is overwhelmingly positive from everyone that visits the restaurant. And that is about the ethos, but it's also about the team and how amazing they are. And that I really wanted it to be a place that was just very genuine and honest. So rather than there being kind of, a lot of procedure or processes or that kind of distance between the team and the guests, actually for it to be just, like going to someone's dining room in their house and just sitting down and having a meal to eat, that there wasn't that sense of disconnect, really. So again, just feeling connected with everything that's happening whilst you're dining, pre and post as well. So an inclusive experience, really. And I think that's where the option of the fact that we do have a lot of plant-based options, but we also have meat, it means that there's something for everybody. And I think you don't need to also feel excluded if you don't want a particular thing, or you can't have a particular thing. You can sit there with people that you may know well, you may not necessarily know well, but everyone can feel relaxed and comfortable within that setting.
That is, again, eating together without having the conflict about is there meat or no meat, for example. It's a very good example. So you mentioned the team again. You mentioned a couple of times. How do you then, because one thing is that you want to build it. How do you then build that culture that, in principle, are bringing your philosophy and vision alive for the journey? So how do you go about that? Because I know it's not a straight up answer to that, but so what is your finding your algorithm? I always call it your cultural algorithm.
Yeah, I like that analogy, actually. I think it feels very much that it's taken, I kind of feel I'm at that point now. And I think if I'd done anything sooner, everything I had done sooner, I hadn't been able to really define, I guess, that algorithm, as you say. And I think for me now, it is very much about being honest and being transparent and being open about what we do and how we do it. And also that we're not there yet. And I think that is we're not this look at us, we're amazing. It's very much about actually, okay, we still have these challenges. How can we work hard to find the best way of doing things so that it makes it easier for others? That's probably my ultimate game, because I think sometimes, we kind of go in circles about what's the best, what's the best ingredient to source from, where do we source it from, how do we get it? We constantly find ourselves questioning that. So to then say, well, actually, look, this is what we found. This is what we found is a great alternative, or this works really well. This is there for people to use. So I think for me to find that in myself has been a lot of, I'd say one of the phrases that I do use quite a lot when I'm doing these kind of talks and things is the process of unlearning. It's been quite significant for me. I think if I look back on my personal journey within London restaurants, and I guess what I was mandate is probably a too strong a word, but the way I was taught, and the way that I was advised and told as to how things had to be. For me, it's been very much a process of unlearning that and finding, actually, hold on, if we strip all that away, what's a way that I feel most comfortable with as well, not just what does the world say is the right way. Because I think we have a lot of, there's a bit of an issue with us deeming success to be financial. And that's the only objective metric we have in some ways. But I think actually there needs to be more to that equation. I think especially for business as well, because I think if you can look at a business that's financially successful, you can say, okay, great. But then what about the underlying aspects? What's their social social success? What's the bigger picture? What do they contribute to society? What do they contribute to the planet? So all these things that actually have kind of pretty big standing is to how to find that metric, which I don't know, if anyone finds it, please tell me. But I think if you look at, for me, it was very much unlearning that actually the only metric was financial.
Well, it's interesting that, when you take I call it the cookie cutter model, that this is how you run a restaurant, this is how you build a business. And that's not true. And I've been, on a similar journey where you had to unlearn. It's very interesting you say that. We wrote a white paper a couple of years ago where it's actually about what it needed to now, and the pandemic was saying to us, and what the employees were saying to us, that how things has been up to now is not the right way. We need to unlearn some practices, and that doesn't mean everything goes out of the window, but maybe the approach goes out of the window, and actually you need to find a different way of serving that solution. If that's something around how you build your employee culture or how you source your thing, you had to unlearn that. It was gone. You couldn't continue operating on it. I think that's super, super, super interesting. But on that journey as well, you've written a book called Planted, which is lots around the plant-based food, and it's interesting. You say, well, actually, meat still needs to be in the ecosystem of things, or else that's what feeds biodiversity. So therefore, we need it here. So, but what actually made you to write a book? Because that's quite an adventure. Because I've tried starting a couple myself, not got there yet, and I know everybody I talk with that's written a book. It's quite a painful process. Besides running businesses,
Yeah, it is. It's tricky. I think that book was probably my. So I had co-authored a number of books before, so it wasn't kind of my first show, which made it a lot simpler. But I think for me, the reason for wanting to do it was, I think I started cooking a lot more plant-based food probably 2015 at Tredwells, because I really felt that it was tricky for, this is when I guess veganism was becoming a thing. But for me, it was very much about, again, kind of heroing the plants. But I guess it stemmed from the ethos of wanting the restaurant to be inclusive, so that, as I mentioned before, if you had, if a family of 4 and you had 2 people that were plant-based and one that just only ate meat and one that didn't eat fish, you want to be able to go out and actually have an experience that was really enjoyable. No one felt like the odd one out. No one had to ask the the waiting staff a million questions and to have things with and without and to just take things off dishes. It actually was just a really enjoyable, inclusive way to eat. So that's when I started cooking a lot more plant-based food. And I found that there weren't too many resources out there for chefs in particular. So I kind of, the more I started to kind of create these things, I thought, actually, I should put this in a book so that it is accessible and usable for chefs and also for home cooks as well. So that's where it all stemmed from.
Do you feel that that vision has moved for you? It doesn't mean it has been your book, but have you actually seen that chefs are now embracing more plant-based food? Because one of the things I've seen through my career is actually often the meat has to be the center or else I can't create a dish.
I think that has been the kind of the rhetoric for a long time, the narrative, and still is for some chefs and some operators. But I think that, I guess, harking back to my childhood, and I've always loved vegetables. So I think for me, it's not really a hardship. I'm not trying to take something and think, how can I make this taste good? Because I think it tastes good anyway. So I think if I can just enhance that, that's kind of my job. And I think that, vegetables get a bit of a bad rep really, because they don't, but we don't give them the same love that we give, to meat or fish, for example, because I always, give the example that you would never steam a steak and eat it because it would be disgusting. But we think nothing of doing that to vegetables like cauliflower, and then we feed them to children and expect them to eat them. It's like, but why? So I think that, with the Maillard reaction that happens when you cook meat, the same reaction happens with vegetables. We don't often allow that process to happen.
Yeah, that's super interesting, especially also in your home cooking, what you can do just with a bit of soy sauce and olive oil with your vegetables in a pan. It's one of the things I took from the book as well, when I read it. So what do you, if we go a bit away from the journey, the mission, your business, and all the things you're involved in, to actually talk a bit about the industry? And you touched on it before. I needed to unlearn a lot of things I've learned in the industry, and we have now a huge amount of challenges, systemic maybe challenges, some of them. How they impacted you on where you are on the journey right now and your day-to-day operation?
I think, touch wood, in terms of I think the biggest crisis right now, well, one of the biggest ones is staffing across the industry. And yeah, touch wood, we've not had any challenges with that as yet. I'm very mindful that, it is a bit of things are quite precarious in terms of the amount of resource you have available within a restaurant. So things can shift very quickly. And we have had people come and go, but they've all gone for really great reasons as well. So for me, it's like actually this ecosystem that brings about change, we kind of need to celebrate it rather than freaking out about it in some ways. But I think that, a lot of what we offer is what people want. So, having the same 2 days off per week, having one of those days being a weekend, it's a huge draw card. But I think overall it's interesting because I think that there's not enough appreciation of the fact of any industry that works outside that normal Monday to Friday 9 to 5. Even if you look at all those things that have to happen for, well, that we're used to and that we take for granted, airports, transport hubs, the supermarket being open until 10 o'clock at night. Those people, that all involves a lot of people. And I don't think it's kind of recognized or valued as much as it should be. And I think in some ways that, in talking about the cost, and I think the true cost of food is not recognized in restaurants. The true cost of how that plate of food got on that table, everyone that was involved in that process, every little cost and every little person involved just isn't really understood. And I think that is a systemic issue because, the true cost of what that costs to get there isn't being recognized, which obviously trickles down to, what people are paid as well. I think that it is one of those things where it is a passion. And sometimes that's tricky to balance with work. So there are a lot of challenges in that respect. And I think also it's not necessarily seen as a kind of valid career path in the UK for people to be, working front of house or working as a chef. I think chef more so, but I think front of house needs a lot more love because it is the framework that holds it all together. So I think that, and again, this goes back to education and food education and the fact that, I was on a talk this morning on a different podcast about how, food education should be as important as maths and English and science. Yet it's not. And, for us to be able to feed ourselves, I would argue is probably the most important thing. We can learn how to do additions and maths, things that we need to function on a day-to-day basis pretty swiftly. But to learn to cook and nourish yourself, I think is one of the most important things that we should be teaching everybody.
Yeah, and if you don't put the right food in, your learning abilities also really drops down.
100%. And you look at the state of our nation and how obesity and malnutrition are both equally, really big, scary problems. And rather than, I guess fixing the source or fixing the true cause, we're just trying to look at kind of sticking plasters and things at the other end of the scale rather than saying, actually, if we could educate and, transform this whole system about teaching people to cook for themselves and what actually is important for their bodies, I think we'd be in a different place.
Yeah, and it goes all the way down to the schools, to, how the food is, served there as well. And we're talking about here hyper-processed food, which we, in general, as a society, consume way too much because actually we don't know what to do with the vegetables or the meat for that sake when we get in our hands. I can see, and I think that I agree. I think there's no actually degree level for food in the school system. It doesn't really exist. There's where there is for everything else, but there's not for food, which also is one of the biggest impact on climate change overall. So that's a really, really interesting angle. What has been, we talked a bit about the challenges of the industry and a bit beyond. What is your most significant learning? Because you've been a business owner in a very hard time. You launched in a very, very difficult time, not just in the industry, in the world. And I think most people I've met, and including myself, we all have had some reflection about, okay, unlearn, you said before, there's something I need to change here. What has been your biggest reflection and how it's impacted you?
I think probably the time that was the biggest reflection for me was COVID. And I think had it not happened, I don't know what I would be doing now, to be honest. Because it had a hugely positive impact, although it was incredibly challenging and tough. The outcome for me was probably pretty remarkable. I think the first lockdown was the first time in 17 or so years that I'd actually stopped. I hadn't probably had more than, kind of 10 days off in that time. So actually just to kind of stop and reconnect with, even my local community, my friends that I hadn't seen because I'd become kind of too busy, and, even if it's a doorstep chat or a FaceTime, and actually then really prioritized what was important. And I think that was when I made the realization kind of, I guess, dawned on me that I needed to stop what I was doing and do something different. So that was probably the most profound kind of point of reflection, really. And I guess that's when I realized that I wanted to open what Apricity now is. And I guess dabbled I did a pop-up in London Fields throughout that time, mainly because I was just freaking out. And, I had this big, huge restaurant in Covent Garden. I had, more people than I had work for. I had so much, we were using every second table. We were only using kind of half the kitchen equipment. So I just kind of thought, well, I need something positive to think about that's going to keep my mind ticking. So that's when I launched the pop-up, which actually, I guess was a bit of a precursor to Apricity, really, and gave me that much needed beacon of light at a time where it was, it was pretty challenging out there. So I think for me, and then to be able to open a new place after all of that was a huge opportunity, because I could, all those changes that I wanted to do that I couldn't do when I was stuck within that framework of previous businesses, I could do. And I kind of set out my stall that that's what I would do from day one. And I wouldn't compromise on the things that had made me uncomfortable in the past. So that's why the 5-day week, the, kind of removing that traditional notion of service charge. All the things that I kind of thought I don't really feel comfortable and confident with this. Being able to open a business post-pandemic actually gave me the opportunity to make all those changes.
So it's about like actually almost the learning as I was listening to it, like to go slow, to go fast again in front of.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. How do you as a business owner, because even though you have all this purpose, you want to do all the right thing, you need to make hard decisions as well. How do you make them? Because like there's lots of hard business decisions that has to be made in the environment we're in.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. I think I probably now I trust my gut a lot more. So I make them more with my gut. I think I let my my head have its say, and then I kind of go with what feels like the best option. And I probably talk to more people and share the burden of those decisions than I ever have before.
That's interesting. The last bit. What have changed there that like sharing? I guess it was the team.
Yeah, it is, and just actually involving them in decisions. Whereas before, I kind of thought, no, I need to make that decision. I need to make that hard decision myself because that's my job. Whereas now, and that's one of those unlearning things, is actually, well, if you let that burden, or not even the burden, but the challenge, or the, actually there could be some different perspectives that you hadn't thought of. It also just means it feels more comfortable when you have to make those hard decisions, that actually, yes, you feel that you've got a good opinion base on what that outcome should be, and then you work towards that outcome.
What about how do you then make sure that, as you went a bit slower and then you went fast again, but how do you then make sure that you show up in the best version of yourself every day with the team? Because I guess you indicated a couple of times the importance of that, that you can show up as your best version with your 5-day week, for example.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's also understanding, the challenges and how I can then show up in my best way. And if I'm not, if my whole business is based around regeneration, then if I'm not doing that to myself, I'm just completely defeating the purpose. And I think that's been one of my biggest things, biggest learning curves, is actually, hold on, like having a break is incredibly important. And so one of my things for myself was that I would take weekends off. After having worked, 16 years of constantly working weekends, that was my big challenge to myself about this restaurant, that I would not work weekends. And I've, 99% of the time I've done it. And again, it's so that I can make sure I've got, I get my creativity and my ideas are, much, much better when I'm not burdened by either overtiredness or stress or having too much on my plate. And I think there's a lot I want to do, and there's a lot I do that's kind of, it's external to the restaurant, but it's all that same kind of ethos. And for me, it's really important that I'm able to do those things, because it enriches my education, it enriches my learning, which then can be brought back into the restaurant. So it's very much ensuring that I have a good rounded, I guess, week. And, every day, every week is different. But ensuring that I'm taking the time to do those things that are important and allowing myself to learn. So I think sometimes when you do get to a certain stage in a business, you kind of focus on everyone else's learning and forget that actually you still need to be able to have that that enrichment yourself as well.
That's super interesting, because actually often, especially when it's your own business, you actually forget to take the time out actually to refresh your own learning, whatever that could be. It could be in food or business skills or whatever it is. And actually sometimes it's always something you do last in a way. And that actually makes your creativity, innovation, and so on. And actually rest, as you say, is probably one of the best meditations you can do, because it really unleashes all of that. So I think that's really well done if you can be on 90%, because I think most business owners, including myself, this is the ongoing struggle, the balance, the temperance, because it's your purpose. It's not a job, it's your purpose. So how do you turn down your purpose and all the things that need still to be done, because the purpose is bigger than you're never done.
I know, it's so true.
Yeah, it's so interesting how I think, and you made it very simple by saying it's the weekends off, and it's those 2 days off that really does it. What is like your top advice for other leaders out there trying to build a business as a force for good like your own, and really trying to be net positive and just profitable?
I think it's very much about being realistic is one of them, is really important. It's not being too aspirational. I think having a good amount of aspiration is important, but you've got to also temper that with what's actually happening in reality and what's possible. I think also just ensuring that there is, I think, giving yourself a break. So sometimes, you can't be perfect, and perfection shouldn't be something that you strive to achieve. You should be able to do as good as you can. And I think very much involving people in that is really important, and getting the skills around you that you don't have and the experience around you that you don't have, to then be able to, have your, as I mentioned before, this kind of farm analogy. You've got the right mix of crops, you've got the good soil. So really kind of try and build it from the ground up rather than from the top down. And actually that ensures it's robust. It ensures it's able to, go with the weather changes that happen. And yeah, I think also in a way it's not having a destination in mind. I think I don't really have a destination in mind. I just want to make the journey as fruitful as possible, really, and to be able to learn as much along the way and to enable others to learn along the way as well.
And that's super interesting, touching on that thing. You don't have a destination and you are focusing on how you can improve things right now. It's as much about what I am in control of or we are in control of than what we are not in control of, I guess. Yeah.
Very much so. And I think that, the saying of control what you can, but don't try and control what you can't is pretty important.
What is the one question you wished I've asked you, and what would that question be, and what would you have answered?
I don't know. That's a tricky one. Perhaps what is the one thing everyone can do today to be more focused on, as we say, actually solutions versus trying to look at fixing the problem versus trying to just look at a cure.
And what would that one thing be?
I would say it is, well, there's more than one answer. This is the problem. I would say, I think, well, as we mentioned, kind of embrace vegetables and just embrace them for their deliciousness, whether it's, roasting a whole cauliflower, whether it's using some beans instead of to substitute with half of your meat. Also, I think in terms of, just valuing food more as well and being really mindful of what you waste. And that's not necessarily looking at, byproducts of peelings of things. It's actually going a step pre that and just saying how your purchasing power is huge. And if you choose to buy, support, again, your support for organizations that are doing great things is really important. And whether that's just your local farmers market or whether it is what's accessible to you and what's possible to you. But I think just being conscious that the fact that does have an impact. The third thing I would say is, and this is just a really personal bugbear, two of these things is reusable coffee cups. I have such a bugbear with single-use coffee cups, takeaway coffee cups. Just get one of those reusable, the Stojo foldable little cups. Keep it on your person, in your bag, and just try and not to use things that don't need to be used. Like the plastic bag tax. We all stopped using plastic bags because of 5p. So we could all stop using takeaway coffee cups if we were just a bit more mindful of the impact of that, really.
That was a very good question, but again, it's with numbers of layers.
Yeah, too many layers.
So where can people find out more about your work and the team's work and connect with you if they want to ask you any questions?
So the website, which is apricityrestaurant.com, has what we do at the restaurant. Then I've got a website, which is chantellenicholson.com, which people can also contact me via there. Social channels, Instagram is @chef_Chantelle, and LinkedIn is a good way to connect as well. So any of the above.
Great. Thank you so much, Chantelle, for coming on the show and sharing your journey, your insights, what you have unlearned, what you're learning right now, and actually your great advice on how we actually can change the world by the way we eat. Power and energy to you and your team.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate that you're listening in. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share with others, rate or give a review, or subscribe to one of our channels, which all can be done via the website hospitalitymavericks.com. I believe that reading the right books is the key to become a better leader. So I've helped you with a curated list of some of the best books to improve yourself, others, and the organization. Find them on hospitalitymavericks.com. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies, and tools to help leaders to become better every day. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on their socials at BizSimply or BizSimplyHQ. You can also email them directly at podcast@bizsimply.com. Thank you to Fina Charlson, who is the show producer from the Podcast Collective. If you have any ideas and feedback for the show or other thoughts, reach out to me via LinkedIn or via my email, michael@hospitalitymavericks.com. I'm Michael Tinkser, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Maverick podcast show. Be Maverick.